So I think it is about 7 o'clock. So I want to welcome everybody that has joined us. We're just going to go over a bit of housekeeping, and then we'll turn it over to Alessia, who's going to give us a fabulous presentation about something that I think is really wonderful and amazing to know that there was an industry in the Blue Mountain area that was harvesting oil from shale rocks. And that's what the purpose of today's talk is. So welcome to our virtual talk, Stuck in a Rock, the History of Shale Oil in Craigleith. My name is Christina Sidorko, and I am the Educational Program Coordinator for the Oil Museum of Canada, National Historic Site. I'll be moderating this presentation for everybody that's joining us this evening. I'm going to begin with some background for Zoom for those that are new and joining us. You can use the chat box to talk with other webinar attendees or to make comments. If you want to send a message to the whole group, please make sure that you sent it to all attendees, or you can put your questions in the chat box or the Q&A poll. And those questions will be submitted. We're going to save the questions for the end of the presentation, unless there's something I think is really pressing, and then we will ask Alessia those questions. I'll be recording the presentation tonight, and you will receive a link so that you can watch it at a later date through email or share it with some of your friends. I want to take a moment to introduce the Oil Museum of Canada before we get started with this presentation. The Oil Museum of Canada is a National Historic Site situated in the historical oil fields of Oil Springs, located in Lambton County. It is the first industrial heritage district recognized under the Ontario Heritage Act. The museum preserves and interprets the important history of Lambton's innovation and global contributions to the pioneering oil industry from its very beginnings in the 1840s up until present day. The main exhibition center was constructed in 1960 and houses over 9,000 artifacts that interpret the history and influence of Lambton's proud oil heritage. In 2001, we started a renovation project that closed the doors of the museum to the public to complete capital improvements, replace aging equipment and building systems that were beyond their life cycle, and refresh the main exhibition gallery with more interactive displays. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Alessia. She is a graduate of Wilfrid Laurier University with an honors bachelor's degree in archaeology and heritage studies. She then completed a master's degree in world heritage at the University of Birmingham. During her undergrad, she was given the opportunity to work with Craigleith Heritage Depot in cataloging its extensive collection, one that took over 2 summers and part of a year to complete. After completing her master's, Alessia was taken on as an intern at Craigleith Heritage Depot, where the staff continue to further their knowledge in the museum and archival field. She was hired as a contract cataloger, oh my goodness, I can speak, and a museum technician. In 2019, Alessia became a permanent museum technician, and in 2023, she was very honored and possibly one of the most amazing people to accept the position of curator. So I want to welcome Alessia to our talk today. Thanks for being with us, and she's going to share her screen, and we're going to let her get started with her presentation. So I'm so excited to learn about the shale oil industry that was working at the same time as the fluid and petroleum industry in Lambton County.
Perfect. So again, I'm Alessia Farris. So I'm the curator of the Craigleith Heritage Depot, which is a small community museum in the heart of the Blue Mountains. So we're situated between the Niagara Escarpment and the shore of Georgian Bay. The artifacts and archival material in the museum's collection reflect the heritage in the Blue Mountains region, which includes our local genealogy, natural heritage, such as fossils and the escarpment, as well as Indigenous history and archaeology, and recreational and industrial histories. I want to welcome everyone to Stuck in a Rock, oil industry in Craigleith. So I want to start the presentation with a land acknowledgement. The First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples of Canada are recognized as the traditional stewards of the land. The municipality of the town of Blue Mountains is located within the boundary of Treaty 18 region of 1818, which is the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat, Wyandot, Wendat peoples. So our talk today will cover local geological formations that would have allowed an oil industry to be established in the Blue Mountains. We will then look at Craigleith Shale Oil Works, its production processes, and we will conclude with the industry's legacy today. So let us begin. So in case you're not familiar with the geographical location we'll be talking about today, I'm going to quickly run through some important areas. So Craigleith Shale Oil Works was situated between the shoreline of Georgian Bay and the Nottawasaga Bay, which are both part of Lake Huron and at the base of the Niagara Escarpment. So Nottawasaga Bay is a sub-bay within Georgian Bay. The communities located on Nottawasaga Bay include Meaford, the Blue Mountains, Collingwood, Wasaga Beach, and Tiny. So the little red dot on the map in front of you marks the general location of what was once Craigleith Shale Oil Works. It is at almost the halfway point between the town of Collingwood and the town of Meaford. To understand how Craigleith Shale Oil Works was able to produce shale oil, we will first look at the geological formations that produce the Blue Mountain shale fields. The southwest part of Georgian Bay is underlain by rocks of the lower and middle Paleozoic era, ranging from 570 million years to 360 million years in age. This era is further subdivided by age into rocks of the Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, and Devonian periods. The Blue Mountains bedrock portion of the escarpment was established in the middle Ordovician period, so approximately 450 million years ago. The exposed rock layers of the Niagara Escarpment are great reference points when understanding the geological periods in southwestern Ontario. The related rock layers that can be traced over long distances are called formations, and the groupings of formations are called groups. Formations and groups are given names usually after the location where they are particularly well exposed or the dominant rock type. So the Ordovician period is represented in the Blue Mountains area by the Blue Mountains, Georgian Bay, and the Lindsay formations. The Blue Mountain and Georgian Bay Formation outcrop area extends from Nottawasaga Bay southeastward to the Toronto area. The subsurface extent, however, it's imperfectly known. The beds are undoubtedly present throughout the eastern part of the Ontario Peninsula, but are not recognized in the western half. The Lindsay Formation forms the upper unit of the regional Ottawa group that underlays eastern Ontario. In the Blue Mountain, it consists of sparsely phosphorus lime mudstone and dark brown to black organic rich calcareous to non-calcareous shale. During the Paleozoic era, most of the North American continent was a stable landmass and was repeatedly flooded by large shallow inland seas. Uplifting of the Earth's crust caused the seas to retreat, creating a cyclical pattern. The region of the Blue Mountains was closer to the equator, so the climate was warm and subtropical. When the seas retreated for the final time, deposits of mud and sand were exposed, which over time would create the current shale and limestone rock and geological features that are present in the area today. The current landscape was sculpted by ancient glaciers that once covered much of North America 12,000 years ago. Streams cutting through unconsolidated glacial deposits to bedrock and wave action from the lake continue to expose the underlying bedrock around the shores of Georgian Bay. The local bedrock mainly consists of a variety of stratified stones, which include sandstone, shale, limestone, and dolostone. These strata were originally deposited as sand, mud, and limey oozes at the bottom of shallow sea that had covered this part of Ontario. Over time, the soft sediments have hardened and been uplifted by geological forces to form bedrock. As the bedrock is exposed to the elements, the sediment becomes visible. As time progressed, the strata was exposed along the shale fields along Nottawasaga Bay and became more visible. The early pioneering families in Collingwood Township found that the shale along the shore would continue to burn if lit, as quarrymen at Shalefield, now known as Craigleith, discovered when fires along the beach continued to burn. Why was the shale along the Georgian Bay shoreline burning? Well, shale oil is a type of sedimentary rock that is rich in kerogen. Kerogen is part of a rock that breaks down and releases hydrocarbons when heated. Hydrocarbons are substances made entirely of hydrogen and carbon. Petroleum and natural gases are probably the most familiar hydrocarbons. The hydrocarbons in oil shale can be used as an alternative to petroleum or natural gas. It was the kerogen within the shale that allowed for the fires started by the locals on Georgian Bay to keep burning. Kerogen, having stalled at the beginning of the oil life cycle, is trapped in marine sedimentary deposits in the same way that crude oil is. However, it has not undergone the chemical process of subsurface heating at significant depths that shimmers organic deposits into oil. Oil shale is considered a fossil fuel developed from the remains of algae, spores, plants, pollen, and other organisms that lived millions of years ago in ancient lakes, seas, and wetlands. When the organism died and drifted to the seabed, they were buried under new layers of plants and sediments. They would decompose and encountered intense pressure and heat, slowly transforming into oil shale and kerogen. As a sedimentary rock, oil shale is found all over the world, including in places like China, Israel, and Russia. The United States, however, has the most shale resources. It is important to note that shale oil is extracted from oil shale. Oil shale is a sedimentary rock, as I said before. So as it reaches its oil window, oil shale releases a liquid known as shale oil. Oil shale is the rock from which shale oil is extracted. Shale oil is obtained from oil shale through a process of heating. The conditions that would have turned oil shale into conventional liquid petroleum were weaker and not as long lasting. These conditions led to the formation of kerogen and not oil. It is kerogen that makes it possible to create fuel from oil shale. Shale oil is similar to petroleum and can be refined into many different substances, including diesel fuel, gasoline, and liquid petroleum gas. People have been using oil shale for thousands of years. So ancient Mesopotamians used shale oil to pave roads and caulk their ships. Ancient Mongolians dipped the tips of their arrows into shale oil during battle, sending flaming arrows at their enemies. And in the Middle East, sticky shale oil was even a component of decorative mosaics. The modern industrial use of all shale oil extraction started in France, where oil shale commercial mining began in the city of Autun in 1837. This industry used industrial processes to heat shale in order to extract the oil. Shale oil was used for a variety of products, which includes paraffin wax. In 1846, a Canadian physicist and geologist, Dr. Abraham Gesner, invented a process for retorting an illuminated liquid from coal, bitumen, and oil shale. During the second half of the 19th century, shale oil extraction industries were initiated in Sweden, Australia, Brazil, New Zealand, Canada, and the US. Obtaining shale from oil shale involves heating kerogen in a process called pyrolysis. Pyrolysis is a form of heating without the use of oxygen. At about 140 to 320 degrees Fahrenheit, kerogen reaches its natural oil window. At 248 to 437 degrees Fahrenheit, kerogen reaches its natural gas window. For production of oil shale, the temperatures are much higher. Now that we have an idea of the geological formations and what shale oil is, we will now look at Craigleith Shale Oil Works. This innovative industry was the only successfully producing shale oil manufacturing plant in Ontario, which operated between 1858 and 1861 in the Blue Mountains. Extracting oil from the shale rock was not a simple process, but the need for illuminating and lubricating oils had grown. So prior to Dr. Abraham Gesner's invention of kerosene in 1849, whale oil was primarily used in lamps and tallow candles. The opportunity to create a clean, high quality, and odorless oil for lamps is what drew interest to the shale fields along Nottawasaga Bay, especially after the cost of oil in the mid-19th century had tripled. Craigleith Shale Oil Works was located in Collingwood Township, not to be confused with the neighboring town of Collingwood. Collingwood Township was made up of 21 smaller communities, now known as the town of Blue Mountains. The community of Craigleith maintains relatively the same location as it did when it was first settled. It is located at the northeastern corner of the township of Collingwood, bordering the town of Collingwood. In 1859, at the time of the establishment of the Craigleith Shale Oil Works, there would have been very little industries in the township, other than saw, paper, and logging mills, and farming and agriculture. The community of Craigleith was slowly growing in the 1850s and 1860s as more settlers arrived into the area. As more people arrived in Craigleith, the area began to change as more land was cleared and more shale rock was exposed. Prior to the establishment of the oil works, geologists and land surveyors were mapping and investigating the areas along Georgian Bay. It is this early exploration that led to the first government documentation of oil resources in the area. Alexander Murray, who was assistant geologist for the province of Canada in 1843, was given jet black shale containing a trilobite fossil by a government land surveyor based in Barrie known as Mr. Ross. Ross told Murray that it had come from the shores of Lake Huron in Collingwood Township. The specific piece that Murray had been given had come from an outcrop on Blue Mountain adjacent to the newly settled farm of George and Sarah Lunan on a Crown land grant on Concession 3, lots 23 and 24 in 1842. The geological survey completed by Murray concluded that the oil shale at Craigleith was part of the broadly distributed Ordovician aeriform. Professional geologists considered the oil shale to be of no economic value. Despite the scholarly conjecture in the lack of economic value, a young immigrant from Manchester, England living in Collingwood, William Darley Pollard, became interested in developing a local shale oil industry. Pollard had been a lawyer in the UK. He was an enterprising man with strong management abilities who was doing extremely well financially in Canada as a harbour businessman. He was capitalizing on the wealth of the Collingwood shipyards. There are varying accounts on how Pollard became interested in shale oil. An excerpt from an oral history recording the lovely townships of Grey and Bruce recount Pollard while sitting beside a campfire, found that filling a flintlock musket barrel with ground shale and heating it on a campfire would produce a flow of oil through the gun's nipple that burned with a fine blue flame. This could be considered the first experiment conducted by the young entrepreneur. We do not have any accounts or primary resources that document where Pollard acquired his knowledge of oil shale processing, but on May 12, 1859, Pollard was issued a letter patent by the Upper Canada Bureau of Agriculture and Statistics for a process to distill petroleum from shale and refine it into lamp oil. Pollard, despite no engineering background, was able to create a process for shale oil refining, which would extract odorless illuminating oil from the abundant shale found along the shores of Craigleith. Despite his growing wealth, the harbor businessman had to find investors to help start his oil production center. He found initial backers in Duncan and John McDonald, a father and son team from a wealthy Toronto family. Together, they set up the company Pollard McDonald & Co. and found other shareholders to cover the startup costs. The facility was built on the farm of George and Sarah Lunan, who were among the first settlers in Collingwood Township. How exactly Pollard was introduced to the oil shale deposits on the Lunan farm is not documented in any surviving records. Perhaps Pollard had read the initial finding reports from the 1843 geology reports made by Murray, or through the grapevine in local circles. Pollard and McDonald made the initial lease payment in 1859 of $160 per acre on 4.7 acres of land, for a total of $760 to Sarah Lunan. Her husband George would never see the promising enterprise as he passed away before it was up and running. The 4.7 acres of Lunan land covered an area that would include the quarry and the buildings needed to distill the oil. The lease was for 14 years and the annual payments were to be $90 payable in quarterly installments. The business partners were obviously expecting a long and healthy return in investment. The first attempts to recover oil from shale rock involved the reconstruction of wood-fueled open-top retorts for destructive distillation that, on a worldwide basis, was a standard technology for the recovery of bitumen from shale and rock deposits. The retorts with their brick and stone fireboxes were preferred for their safety as escaping associated gases vented into the atmosphere, which minimized the risk of accidental explosions. In one of the few historical records we have regarding Craigleith Shale Oil Works, an 1863 progress report from the Geological Survey of Canada, William Logan noted that oil shale works did not begin regular production until after 2 or 3 unsuccessful trials and the repeated destruction of the works through fire. At last, in 1860, they got into a successful production and a ready market was found for the oils. Pollard's distillation process employed 24 cast iron retorts and a rectifying process that separated light lamp oil from heavier lubricating oil and heavy asphalt residue from the shale rock. A retort is an airtight vessel in which substances are heated for a chemical reaction, producing gaseous products to be collected in a collection vessel or for further processing. Unfortunately, we have no documentation that can tell us what the 24 retorts look like at Craigleith Shale Oil Works or how they truly functioned. On the screen, you will see the Alberta Taishik processor retort, which shows you a modern retort machine. The cast iron retorts were set in 2 ranges and heated by means of wood. 25 cords of wood were needed weekly to run the retorts. So 1 full cord is 8 feet long by 4 feet wide by 4 feet high. This dimension gives a total volume of 128 cubic feet. Cords of wood can weigh anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 pounds. With that being said, shale oilworks would have needed a lot of wood to power their retorts. The process Pollard created used a low red heat for 2 to 3 hours to release the oil. Any gas that's separated from the heated shale was captured in a warm pipe, cooled, and condensed in water. By using a low red heat, it would reduce volatile oil from releasing from the shale and stop it from gasifying and escaping. The condensed oil was reheated to 150 degrees in vessels, and then it was separated from the water and most of the impurities in a skimming process. The oil itself was further separated by another partially distillation that captured heavier lubricating oil and heavy asphalt residue. This process would yield 250 gallons of crude oil, which correspond to roughly 3% of the rock that was the shale rock. The process that Pollard created operated at an efficiency that helped to keep Craigleith Shale Oil functioning as a profitable manufacturing plant, but this was not always the case. Initially, Shale Oil Works was not producing efficiently. Pollard traveled across North America to other similar fossil fuel facilities, observing their processes and bringing back the information gathered to his Craigleith factory. Everything the young entrepreneur had learned was added to the procedures and policies of the growing company. The information he had learned helped him to develop pardon my pun, a well-oiled machine. It was clear that Pollard believed in the product he was producing and wanted to establish a high-functioning oil industry in Craigleith. Shale Oil Works was generating oil with a 24-hour working factory. It took 30 to 36 tons of shale to produce 250 gallons of oil, which was distilled daily. At this rate, they would have produced around 90,000 gallons per year. The product was popular in addition to its more pleasant aroma and higher candle power. The lamp oil sold for 1/3 less than the cost of kerosene and coal gas. This is according to the Owen Sound Comet newspaper. Sorry, pardon. Pollard continued to try new production tips and techniques, finally landing on the process that would receive about 50% oil, 25% lubricating oil, and 25% fertilizer or feedstock, leaving little residue from the factory that could damage the environment or be released back into the atmosphere. Transportation of the final product was tricky. The primary market for the oil produced in Craigleith was in Toronto. Most of the manufactured oil would have to make its way to the closest train station to be transported to the market. There was a market for local sales, but the revenues from this market would have been quite small compared to that of the city. The rail line between the town of Collingwood and Meaford would not be installed until 1872. The only way to transport goods from the oil works factory was by horse-drawn wagons to the railhead adjacent to the Collingwood Harbour, a 12.4-kilometer trek. This would have been both costly and time-consuming. The manufacturing plant was created adjacent to the shoreline in Craigleith, between what is now Highway 26, the yellow road in both the right side and top left image, and the base of the escarpment near Craigleith Provincial Park.
There are so many parallels to what was going on in Oil Springs at the same time. The problems of transportation, the fact that the surveyor was Alexander Murray. He was the same person that did the surveys in Oil Springs. And that all of these things both ended up in the Logan report. So there's some pretty amazing parallels. I'll let you continue on.
So in the bottom left image with the red circle, you can see the Lunan property and its proximity to the bay and the escarpment. So the Lunans owned a sizable land and used it primarily for farming prior to them renting part of the property to Pollard, McDonald & Co. In the image on the right, you can see a close-up of Craigleith Provincial Park, which is the general location of the Craigleith Shale Oil Works Production Center. So the scope of operation included the quarry where shale was extracted to be used in the distillation process, lodges which were used to produce firewood and power the retorts, the boiler engine house, which was used to create steam power. So groundwater was leaking into the quarry, and the boiler engine house would pump the water to allow for workers to continue to mine the shale. Workshops were set up for the blacksmith and carpenters who would help to maintain the equipment, tools, and buildings needed for operation. A building to house the 24 distillation cast iron retorts, a still room for the rectifying process, and a 2-story log bunkhouse, which included a kitchen and a living quarters for the workers. So the daily expense for the operation was about $100. So on your screen now is a hand-drawn map. It was created in the 2000s by a local avocational historian archaeologist who used the information gathered from a surface survey of the site and secondary resources to document the location of the oil works, the production center's layout, and points of interest on the site. The map marks the relative location of the bunkhouse and other buildings to modern landmarks like Arrowhead Road, Highway 26, and the Provincial Park. So on the map, A, which is right here, I'm pretty sure you can see my mouse.
Yes,
so
we can.
Perfect. So A here and B, as well as K, which is right next to A. They're marked down as cottages. These could have functioned as lodges or workshops based on their size. Then we have C, which shows a beds of black crushed shale waste, which are remnants left after the production center was closed. We then have H, which is right here. It is quite a large building. So it shows the distillation building that housed the 24 retorts. It was a relatively large building. A base of a chimney was found at the center of the foundations, which is marked G on the map. It was most likely used to either vent out or intake air for the distillation process. And then there's F, which is just right next to it. It was marked as a cottage on the map. However, with its close proximity to the structure H, it was most likely the still room for the rectifying process. Structure N, which is right over here, and it's part of the provincial park. Based on its size of 110 feet by 48 feet, and its distance from the quarry and the distillation building, it was most likely the 2-story bunkhouse where workers would eat and sleep. Structure M, which is found at the bottom here, is the Lunan Homestead, which still remains today. It was set back from the factory itself, which isn't much of a surprise, as I doubt the Lunans wanted to hear the 24-hour production of the shale oil. The factory and the plant's other facilities were immense in acreage, considering the size of the communities in the region. At the time, many of the residential areas were hamlets or small villages. The factory's tools and equipment, construction materials, and supplies were brought in by schooner from England, the US, and other parts of Canada. Documentation is lacking on whether these items were delivered to the Collingwood Harbour and brought by horse-drawn wagon, or if they were transferred at Collingwood Harbour to smaller boats that could dock closer to the factory. We do have documentation that small vessels could dock in the vicinity, none large enough to transport the amount of oil being produced at the oil works, but they may have been able to transport the machinery needed to refine and distill the oil, but we can't be sure. Documentation varies with information about the amount of men employed at the factory. We estimate that the shale oil works would have employed around 60 to 100 men. The majority of the employees would have been engaged in quarrying and breaking up the shale to create feedstock or cutting and hauling the wood, which was used as fuel to power the retorts and the distillation machines. While other employees would stock the retorts with shale and hauled out spent ash, probably using equestrian drawn wagons. We do have evidence of ox pulled wagons in the Blue Mountains, so they may have even used oxen to pull the quarried shale to the retorts and haul out the spent ash. The remainder ran the distillation and refining processes. We are not sure if the men who were employed at the factory were from local families or if Pollard, McDonald & Co. brought in miners, engineers, carpenter, and welders to facilitate the factory's operations. With many of the local communities being hamlets and villages, there's a high probability that some of the workers would have come from outside of Collingwood Township. Like with many early production facilities, fire was a major threat to any type of production center. There was a little blip in production when a fire on April 28, 1860 interrupted production and destroyed around 1,100 to 1,500 gallons of refined oil, a week's production, as well as the building that housed the retorts. The fire itself was caused by carelessness. The wooden factory structure had to be replaced, but the equipment itself was so well designed and built that it was not severely damaged and was back to production within 10 days. Many scholars and researchers have stated that at the time, the illuminating oil produced in Craigleith was the best fossil fuel illuminating oil being produced in all of North America. Unfortunately, the fledgling industry established in Craigleith would go under. The York Herald on August 25th, 1861 reported, oil is now procured in such large quantities from the rich springs in the county of Lambton, has rendered the enterprise unprofitable and caused it to be abandoned. The enterprise, the only one of its kind in the province history, failed by 1863. The inefficiency of its process in comparison to the competitors who, after discovering large quantities of oil at Petrolia and Oil Springs near Sarnia, sprang up, leaving Craigleith Shale Oil Works to be unable to match output and overall cost. Extracting and processing shale oil is an expensive and difficult process. Coal, petroleum, and natural gas are less expensive to extract. Despite the end of production in Craigleith, production in many nations, including Estonia, China, and Brazil, continue to rely on shale or oil shale for fuel. It is burned to generate electricity. It is a component in chemical industries, and byproducts are used in cement production. After shutting down, the Lunan family reclaimed their lands and the adjacent shale field along the bay. The community was renamed Craigleith when the railway arrived, and the tracks were built directly through the shale field. Over time, the equipment rusted and the buildings rotted, the quarry filled with water, and the forest grew back, covering all that remained of the site. The abandoned bunkhouse was burned down around 1908 in an arson fire. Very little remains of the original manufacturing plant to date. Lot 22 and 23 would eventually be cut into smaller properties and sold off. What remains of the site is scattered throughout these properties covered by brush and dirt. The only reminder of the promising industry is an Ontario Heritage Foundation roadside marker at the gate to Craigleith Provincial Park, honoring this innovative industry. Many aspects of the business remain a mystery to scholars and researchers. William Pollard invested quite a bit of his own capital into the business, but there are no records to indicate how much he put in or put up and how much he lost when the business went under. William Logan, the government geologist I mentioned earlier, lamented in his 1863 report of progress. Data, however, are wanting to show whether the enterprise was remunerative. According to Logan, the 24 retorts consumed 25 cords of wood each day and processed 30 to 36 tons of shale. Its daily output was 250 gallons of oil, and the cost to produce would have been 14 cents per gallon. The information Logan gathered for his report came directly from Pollard and from newspaper sources. However, other than Logan's report, we have no other supporting documentation. Although its success was modest and brief, the project is significant as the first technically viable paying unconventional oil plant in Canada. Unlike at other fossil fuel factories and quarries, no man ever lost his life at Craigleith Oil Shale Works, and there is no environmental blight that remains along the shore of Georgian Bay and beneath the rim of the Niagara Escarpment. The oil produced in Craigleith was the same premium quality as whale oil, and it was cleaner and brighter burning. The history of Craigleith Oil is still unfinished. We have no photographs, drawings, or architectural and engineering renderings that would enable historians to better understand shale oil works and the patent process created by Pollard. Other than the date of Pollard's patent, the year shale oil started production, and the eventual end of the business, there are no verified dates for the oil shale works timeline, and there are complete gaps in the historical record. As a museum and archive, we have collected as much secondary sources to better understand and share this remarkable story. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
We do have questions, and I have some ideas of where you can do some other investigation because of the similarities between the two sites. Alexander Murray did the surveys for Oil Springs, and he has diaries, so we should snoop through his diaries. I don't know where they're held right now, but I think we need to do that. And I think we need to go look at the original Logan reports, 1 and 2, because there were several of those in the early 1850s and 1860s. And samples were sent to the World's Fair in both England and Paris. So I think there are more resources to help support and do some research. But we do have a question. So can you walk us through the 62-meter retort process shown in the slide?
Perfect. Yeah. Like this, the 62.5, I'm not aware of how they currently function as a retort. I just am aware of how Pollard created his distillation. I'm not sure if it's the same process still used today. So I don't know if you're able to answer that question, but I can definitely show you what it looks like. Maybe hold it so people can read the screen and see the different process. So the oil shale feed goes through, there's a cooling zone, preheat tubes, there's a retort seal, the retort itself, which is what heats it, and then the combustion zone, and then the vapor tube is what catches, I'm assuming, the gas, but not the oil. So I'm not 100% sure how that part works, unfortunately.
Yeah, neither am I. I know how a distillation tower works, and I know how a cat cracker works. But retort furnaces are a little bit different for me. So we have an anonymous attendee. Are there any company branded artifacts that have survived?
The only thing we have was the first or second image I had on my screen. And it is just the bricks from one of the buildings. Oh, there they are. These bricks here are the only things we unfortunately have. The buildings, most of them burned down. They were torn apart when the property was cut up into different pieces and people started building their homes on them. So yeah, all we have really are these cast aside bricks from the building, but there is no like stamp on it that says Shale Oil Works. Nothing like that, unfortunately. We're always hoping that maybe someone's great grandfather or grandfather worked at Oil Shale Works and took some things with them when the company went under. But unfortunately, no, we don't have anything that has anything stamped with Shale Oil Works.
Do you have any diaries from the Pollards or letters from the Pollards?
No, unfortunately not.
Do you have even the like the business bookkeeping books? Like those are things that would have been hopefully kept, unless there was like some of the problems that we've had fires. So
we don't have any here at the depot. He did become mayor of Meaford, but Meaford were our previous curator who did much of this research on this topic. She was in contact with both Collingwood because Pollard was from Collingwood or emigrated to Collingwood, and then he moved to Meaford after everything kind of failed here in Craigleith. And no one's donated them, no one's kept them. Their family might have moved away and doesn't realize what they have, or it just got lost in the shuffle kind of thing. We're hoping one day it will pop up because it was a profitable business for quite a few years, and they must have some books record keeping all that information.
Really intrigued by what you were saying about the process, because low smell. Oil Springs oil is a sour crude. It's got a heavy sulfur content. It is known throughout the world as the skunk oil. It's really pungent. We call it the smell of money in Oil Springs, but it was really pungent. So I could see how you would be creating a boutique product at Craigleith, that this was a clean, unadulterated, didn't have the sulfur component, because the kerosene in Oil Springs is quite yellow at this period of time because of that sulfur. And it was a chronic environmental problem with the sulfur content, that in the 1950s, we have sweetening units on all three major petrochemical refineries to remove the sulfur from the oil. And that was why some of the American products were preferred to the Canadian product, because of the stench. Because our friends in Pennsylvania, It's sweet crude.
Okay. Well, I know I'm a big proponent of the reason shale oil really failed was because there's no way to transport. Like I know the oil in Lambton County was probably cheaper to make, but there is a boutique even now. Then there's boutique items, and I feel like a lot of people might have preferred a less smelly oil. But I
Yeah,
think
and we had problems with transport as well. We had to build the plank roads out of the swamp
Mhm.
it was about 15 kilometers to Petrolia, and then an additional 12 kilometers to Wyoming to the railheads. However, the plank roads charged 15 cents.
Mhm.
And they made about $6,000 in tolls in a year because there were 40,000 horse-drawn vehicles transporting oil.
Mhm.
But the volumes of oil produced were so much significant
Yeah.
when we were producing not gallons of oil, but 70,000 barrels of oil.
Yeah, that definitely probably was a big proponent of the
So we have our
reducing.
anonymous, not autonomous,
Mhm.
attendee. If the cost was 14 cents a gallon to produce, do you have an idea what a gallon sold for in Toronto?
Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find any information. I would assume it probably would sell for at least 20 cents. Like they would have to make some profit from it.
So
But
I do know for a fact that Oil Springs kerosene sold for 60 cents a gallon.
so there must
So
probably been more than 60 cents if it
yeah,
went.
so we were selling in Hamilton, because we do have the advertisements from James Miller Williams, that those oil kerosene products were selling for 60 cents a gallon, while about whale oil was selling for $1.20.
So so I know that at least shale oil was always underneath whale oil. It was cheaper than the whale oil that was being
Yeah.
produced.
So
So
we have
middle of the road.
the comparison of $1.20 for whale oil and about 50 to 60 cents a gallon for kerosene. Some people did prefer whale oil because it was a soft yellow light compared to the brilliant white light with a bit of a stench for the Oil Springs kerosene. So yeah, there was profitability within the
Mhm.
market. So do we have any other questions hanging out there? I want to talk to Alessia at a later date because I see so many similarities. The problems of transportation, you have Alexander, you have the same geologist, so we have the same Logan report. We still have Alexander Murray as the primary surveyor of both the oil lands in Oil Springs and the shale works. And so I do know that Alexander Murray was a frequenter of pubs and he was quite a chatty fellow. So I can imagine that those products, those ideas were shared with the Polish the same way that they were shared with the Trips here in Oil Springs. And just those amazing similarities, problems of transportation, the same key players. And I think we should investigate that Logan report a little bit more closely.
Yeah, I agree. It's an amazing story and it has so many neat things. And I think more research should be done about it and hopefully finding those key pieces that are missing to make it more of a fuller story and learn more about the intricacies of the process and what it looked like and all that kind of stuff. I really hope that we're able to find some more information about it.
Yeah, and one of the cool things is that shale has become so important to our energy future and our energy structure here in North America. If we include our friends in Alberta or our friends in Pennsylvania and in certain parts of the United States, because shale oil was a real boom in the 2000s and in the 2010s. The difference is they weren't putting it in a retort furnace. They were doing high pressure steam to create the kerogen out of high pressure fracking. So using the natural gas from those fracking processes. And as far as anybody's concerned, fracking and horizontal drilling was developed in Oil Springs and Titusville, Pennsylvania. Titusville developed fracking in the 1860s with the torpedo works, and horizontal drilling was developed in 1926 in Oil Springs. by Leo Rainey. So there are a lot of these full circle stories that we have these historical precedents, and we're reinvestigating them now in the present, and how they are creating energy security. So anyways, any other questions before I close her up, friends? It's a beautiful night. The sun is still out. We encourage you to enjoy it. And I encourage you to go visit Craigleith Heritage Depot. They got some amazing new exhibits that should be opening in a couple weeks. And I want to thank you again for talking with us and sharing this fascinating. I am more fascinated than the average kid, because I see the similarities. So on behalf of the Oil Museum, I want to thank you for doing this talk and all the tremendous research you and your colleagues have done for this. I want you to keep in mind, friends, that you will be receiving an email copy of this presentation. It'll also appear in about a week's time on the Oil Museum of Canada's YouTube channel. We also want you to keep in mind that there are some future events happening at the Oil Museum of Canada. So this summer on July 8th, we have Black Gold Fest happening. So we encourage you to come visit the Oil Museum of Canada and explore our petroleum heritage. And we ask that you sign up for our next talk, which will be in November with Dr. Tembe from the University of Texas, Rio Grande. He'll be talking about air pollution in the St. Clair River Basin, and some of the pollution that may come from these refineries that are very key to our development. We are looking to see how improvements are made and all of that. In the meantime, please refer back to the Oil Museum of Canada. Check out our website, come visit us, go visit our friends at Craigleith, as we are very excited to continue these discussions and investigations into our petroleum and oil heritage and the industrial heritage of our communities. So thanks again, friends.
Thank you.
So I will stop recording.